Okay, I think we're live. It looks like it. For some reason, it says that they're waiting for me. Nope, there goes the screen. Okay, so let me double check the sound real quick because I don't want any problems with it. Screen. Okay, so let me double check the sound real quick because I don't want any problems with it. Screen. Okay. Looks like that is fine. I do want to adjust the vocals a little bit, so give me a second. Just give me a little bit of a second here, and let's go to that setting and see what that sounds like. In 1 second. And why am I not hearing anything anymore? What did I just do? Did I accidentally close the damn window? And why am I not hearing anything anymore? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close the damn window? And why am I not hearing anything anymore? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close the damn window? And why am I not hearing anything anymore? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close anymore? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close? Okay, is this one better? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close? I don't know what's going on. Okay, is this one better? Oh, what did I just do? Did I accidentally close? Yeah, it keeps cutting out. I don't know what's going on. Okay, is this? Let me refresh this window so I can check it. Did I accidentally close? Yeah, it keeps cutting out. I don't know what's going on. Okay, is this? Let me refresh this window so I can check it. Did I accidentally close? Yeah, it keeps cutting out. I don't know what's going on. Okay, okay, things are repeating. And I don't know why. Let me give it a few seconds. Repeating. And I don't know why. Let me give it a few seconds. And did that work? Did it? Okay, well, the voice sounds fine to me now at this point anyway, so who cares? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to be watching this. And let me make sure that you still have the screen going. You do. Congratulations. This is good. Okay, I can minimize you. And I can get this window here. And go here so I can see. And I see Pinoid is here. What's up, he says. I won't do it the way that the crazy people do. I'll just say, what's up? Okay, so we're going to watch this, When Harry Became Sally. I haven't seen this, so I did watch it to at least get to the point of where we can start watching it together. Because there's a long intro, and so what I'm going to be doing is muting my mic, and then when I want to say something, I'll pause it and say whatever it is I want to say. I think it sounds like a pretty good plan. And on a side note, it got to 81 degrees here today, South Central Pennsylvania. And then a storm came in, and we're going to drop more than 40 degrees tonight from our high.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Douglas and Sarah Allison Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions, and those who will be joining us on a future occasion on C-SPAN Book TV. For those in-house, we would ask that courtesy check that our mobile devices have been silenced or turned off. And of course, for those watching online, you're welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. Introducing our program today is Emily Gao. She is our director of the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. She's an attorney who has defended religious freedom for the last 14 years. She has worked on behalf of victims of religious freedom violations in East Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and South Asia at the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom and Beckett Law. She previously worked at the United Nations and Lanham and Watkins. Ms. Gow also has taught international human rights law at George Mason University's Law School as an adjunct law professor. Please join me in welcoming Emily Gow. Emily?
Welcome, Emily. Let's do this. Hopefully her introduction isn't going to be long.
Thank you, John. Welcome very much to Heritage. In this transgender moment, Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, has articulated one area of agreement with activists from the transgender movement and two areas of clear disagreement. The one area of agreement is that the people who experience gender dysphoria, the feeling that one's emotional and psychological identity is at odds with their biological sex, are in great pain. The stories that are retold in this book attest to the emotional, psychological, and mental anguish that they feel. The book's first area of disagreement with the transgender activists is on how gender dysphoria should properly be treated. Ryan has clearly laid out the conflict between doctors, advocates, and patients on both sides of this debate. The book comprehensively examines the arguments in medicine, law, and culture, and then recommends sound public policy. And the book's second disagreement with transgender activists and their political supporters is on who should speak about the treatment of gender dysphoria. Transgender activists have sought to silence courageous experts in pediatrics, endocrinology, and biology by demonizing them as bigots because they urge caution in radical transgender treatments of surgeries and hormones. These activists have sought to and succeeded in removing experts from their positions of professional authority and influence. Transgender activists have also sought to silence women who have spoken about the danger that they feel when safeguards to prevent against sexual assault are removed in private facilities. Transgender activists have also sought to silence the mothers and the fathers who do not want their children to be conditioned to disbelieve in reality and to believe in a physiological impossibility. And finally, transgender activists have sought to silence those who have suffered the most, the people who have come to realize that no amount of hormone treatments or surgery can change the biological reality of their sex, and now live with regret at what they have lost. Ryan's book ensures that all of these voices will be heard and none will be silenced. It could not arrive at a more pertinent time for our nation as the military considers whether to admit people suffering from gender dysphoria in every rank and every branch of the military. And as parents around the country learn the stunning news that an Ohio judge has terminated custody of parents over their 17-year-old daughter because of her struggles with gender dysphoria. At this critical time, the freedom to debate the best treatments for gender dysphoria must be protected. As one reviewer wrote about this book, the minds, the bodies, and the very lives of men, women, and children are at stake. Would you now please welcome Ryan Anderson to the podium? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for coming. America's in the midst of what's been called a transgender moment. Not long ago, most Americans had never heard of transgender identities, but within the space of a year, it became a cause claiming the mantle of civil rights. But is it true that a boy can be trapped in a girl's body? Is our sex assigned to us? Can modern medicine reassign sex? What is the most loving and helpful response to the condition of gender dysphoria? And what should our laws say on these issues? These shouldn't be difficult questions. In the late 1970s, Dr. Paul McHugh thought he had convinced the vast majority of his professional colleagues not to go along with new radical claims about sex and gender that some of his colleagues at Hopkins were making. McHugh had received a world-class education first at Harvard College, then at Harvard Medical School. And in the 70s, he became the psychiatrist-in-chief at Johns Hopkins Hospital and the chair of the psychiatry department at Johns Hopkins Medical School. And it was in 1979 that he shut down the sex reassignment clinic at Hopkins. As a result of that, many other institutions followed the lead of the elite Johns Hopkins. But recent years have brought a resurgence of these procedures, not in light of new medical information, but because of ideology. And the people increasingly in the spotlight of the transgender moment are children. In 2007, Boston Children's Hospital became, as its website brags, quote, the first major program in the United States to focus on transgender children and adolescents, end quote. Today, a decade later, more than 45 pediatric gender clinics have opened their doors to our nation's children. Parents are told that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones may be the only way to prevent their children from committing suicide. Never mind that the best studies of gender dysphoria show that somewhere between 80 to 95% of children who express a discordant gender identity will naturally grow out of it and come to identify with their bodily sex if development is allowed to proceed. Never mind that 41% of people who identify as transgender attempt suicide at some point in their lives. Never mind that people who have had transition surgery are 19 times more likely than average to die by suicide. These statistics should stop us in our tracks. They should be enough to prevent the headlong rush into transitioning and prompt us to find more effective therapeutical responses. Most of all, we shouldn't be encouraging children to transition or making heroes and role models out of those who have done so. In my new book, I argue that Dr. McHugh got it right, that the best biology, psychology, and philosophy all support an understanding of sex as a bodily reality and of gender as a social manifestation of sex. Biology isn't bigotry. And so in the book, I strive to offer a nuanced vision of human embodiment, a balanced approach to the public policy questions, and then a sober and honest survey of the human costs of getting human nature wrong. And so let me start with some of the claims that are being made by the activists. People say that we live in a postmodern age that has rejected metaphysics, but that's not quite true. We live in a postmodern age that promotes an alternative metaphysic. And at the heart of the transgender moment are radical claims about the human person. In particular, that people are what they claim to be, regardless of evidence. So that a transgender boy is a boy, not a girl who identifies as a boy. And it's understandable why activists would make these claims. An argument about identities will be much more persuasive if it's about who someone is, not how someone identifies. And so the rhetoric of transgender activists drips with ontological assertions. People are the gender they identify with. That's the claim. Now, the activists don't want to admit that this is a metaphysical claim. They don't want to have the debate on the level of philosophy. And so they dress it up as a scientific and medical claim. And they've co-opted many professional associations for their cause. And so immediately I want to distinguish between the activists who are promoting transgender ideology and individual people who suffer from gender dysphoria or people who identify as transgender. The vast majority of people with gender dysphoria, people who identify as transgender, they're not activists of any sort. They're not ideologues of any sort. Frequently, they're the victims of the activists and the ideologues. Imagine how much you would be suffering, how much distress you would have if you would contemplate taking hormones and having surgery to reassign your sex. These people are suffering. And so it's important that our response to them be one of compassion and respect for their struggle. But we also need to be aware of the harm that activists are doing by promoting their ideology. And that's what I want to examine for the remainder of this lecture, is the ideology being advanced by the activists. And as I mentioned, they've co-opted many scientists and professional associations. So I have some slides, just these are just some quotes that I'm going to read so you can read along. There we go. From a medical perspective, the appropriate determinant of sex is gender identity. It is counter to medical science to use chromosomes, hormones, internal reproductive organs, external genitalia, or secondary sex characteristics to override gender identity for purposes of classifying someone as male or female. That radical claim was made in an expert declaration to the federal court in North Carolina during the litigation on HB 2. It's made by Dr. Deanna Atkins, a professor at Duke University School of Medicine and the director of the Duke Center for Child and Adolescent Gender Care, which opened in 2015, which shows you both how quickly these new clinics have been popping up, how they have reached the most elite institutions of American life, and how radical the claims are. Because a generation ago, chromosomes, hormones, internal reproductive organs, external genitalia, and secondary sex characteristics were the bread and butter of medical science. Today, they're contrary to medical science. That's what an expert witness is claiming to a federal court. And remarkably, this witness is saying that gender identity determines sex. Because historically, the way that the word gender was even created was in distinction to sex. That sex was a bodily, biological reality, but gender was a social construct. Now the argument is that our gender identity determines our sex, and that all the other physical aspects are counter to medical science. Activists aren't content simply to leave it in the courtroom. They want to now indoctrinate children to believe this as well, and they want to start with children as young as possible. And so they've created graphics to be used in kindergartens and elementary schools to help children think about their own bodies and their own identities. This is the genderbread person. The genderbread person claims that when it comes to our sexual identity, we have 5 different aspects of our identity that exist along 5 different spectrums. So there's gender identity, which the graphic says, quote, is how you in your head define your gender based on how much you align or don't align with what you understand to be the options for gender. The graphic lists, quote, 4 of infinite possibilities. And the 4 that it lists are womanness, manness, two-spirit, and genderqueer. There's also gender expression, which is, quote, the way you present gender through your actions, dress, and demeanor. According to the graphic, this can be feminine or masculine, butch or femme, androgynous or gender neutral. Then the genderbread person lists biological sex. And then finally, there are 2 components for sexual orientation: sexually attracted to and romantically attracted to. And students are told they have to identify themselves and interpret their own experiences, their own feelings along this graphic. But the genderbread person got in trouble. The genderbread person got in trouble for 2 reasons. First, the genderbread person looks too much like a man. It looks like a genderbread man. And so the genderbread person, even though it was supposed to be the cutting edge of gender ideology, was actually supporting the patriarchy. And then secondly, it says sex, it says biological sex, and that's now an outdated term. So the new graphic is the gender unicorn. Appropriately enough, they use a unicorn, a mythical creature. And then you'll now see that where we used to have biological sex, children are taught that it's merely sex assigned at birth, as if you came out of the womb and someone just assigned it to you. And then the group who made this graphic, the Trans Student Educational Resources, they explain this. Biological sex is an ambiguous word that has no scale and no meaning, besides that it is related to some sex characteristics. It is harmful to trans people. Instead, we prefer sex assigned at birth, which provides a more accurate description of what biological sex may be trying to communicate. Now, from this vision of the human person, what I've called transgender ontology, gives forth to transgender medicine, how to respond to the condition of gender dysphoria. And transgender activists, they promote a 4-part standard of care for children with gender dysphoria. The first is that children should be allowed and even encouraged to socially transition if they express a consistent, insistent, and persistent identity as the opposite sex. So a 5-year-old boy who persistently, insistently, and consistently claims to be a girl should be given a new name, a new pronoun, a new wardrobe, and have access to new bathrooms and locker rooms and sports teams. That's the first step. The second step is as that 5-year-old boy approaches puberty, he should be placed on puberty blocking drugs to prevent him from, quote, going through puberty in the wrong body. Then as the child approaches 16, but increasingly this age is being lowered to 14, the child should be given the opposite sex's sex hormones, estrogen for the boy, testosterone for the girl, to mimic puberty in the right body. Because what you now have is a 14, 15, 16-year-old who hasn't developed when all of their classmates have. By blocking puberty indefinitely, you've created a child who's now age 16 and hasn't gone through their growth spurt, hasn't biologically developed. And so to mimic puberty, they administer estrogen and testosterone. And then the fourth step of this 4-part standard of care is surgery. Not everyone opts for this, but at age 18, the experts claim that teenagers should be eligible to have both bottom and top surgery. The book goes into the details, but we don't have time today. Now, this vision of medicine, you might think it sounds a little extreme, a little radical to be doing this, especially with 5-year-old kids, kindergartners who are going through a gender-conflicted stage. But the experts maintain that even young children as young as 2 or 3 years old can have a real gender identity, and that parents and educators ought to respect that 2 or 3-year-old's real gender identity. So an expert declaration, let me advance the slide, expert declaration to that same federal court in North Carolina over HB2, Dr. Scott Leibowitz says, peer-reviewed research demonstrates that pre-pubertal children asserting a different gender identity from the one they, quote, were assigned at birth, are cognitively capable enough to be aware of the gender they are asserting. The meaning of a child's gender identity assertion at a younger age is no less valid than the meaning of gender identity assertion of an older child. And then one of the activist groups, children know a lot about themselves and their gender from a very young age. And whether they reveal themselves to be gender expansive, transgender, or eventually neither, the most important thing we can do is listen to what our children are telling us and really hear them. This comes from a group, PFLAG. It was an acronym that used to stand for Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. That left out the T of transgender, and so now it just goes by the acronym, which again shows you how quickly things are moving. Even LGBT activist groups had left out the T from their initial names and their initial acronyms. And now they're telling everyone else that if you don't agree with them, that young children can have a real gender identity and we should listen to them for that. You are a bigot. It also goes on in the university. So here's Professor at University of California, San Francisco. Like left-handed people, our young transgender people are only a small minority of the general population. And like left-handed people, they are a variation of human development that is to be celebrated and honored rather than punished or denied. And they are our best teachers and are alerting us to the reality that gender exists primarily between our ears, in our brains and minds, and not necessarily by what is between our legs, our genitalia, or in our accompanying XX or XY chromosomes, as many are mistakenly prone to believe. We demonstrate how much we have yet to learn when we say, but honey, you can't be a girl, you're a boy because you have a penis, boys have penises, and girls have vaginas. The professor continues, speaking about these children. They refuse to pin themselves down as either male or female. Maybe they are a boy-girl, or a gender hybrid, or gender ambidextrous, moving freely between genders, living somewhere in between, or creating their own mosaic of gender identity and expression. As they grow older, they might identify themselves as agender, or gender neutral, or gender queer. Each one of these children is exercising their gender creativity, and we can think of them as our gender creative children. This professor is the director of mental health at the Child and Adolescent Gender Center at Benioff Children's Hospital at the University of California, San Francisco. This is the advice that parents who have children suffering from gender dysphoria are likely to receive when they take their children to mainstream medical clinics today. These are the claims that are being advanced that we're supposed to, as adults, learn from our children, the realities of their body and their identity. Now, from the transgender ontology and the transgender medicine follows transgender policy. And I just want to hit on 4 aspects of that. First are the lessons that will be taught in schools. You know, whether or not the school that your child or your grandchild attend, if that child will be subjected to the genderbread person or the gender unicorn, whether they will be taught that their own sexual identity is fluid and exists along a spectrum. Then there's access to the sex-specific facilities and programs. This is where the Obama Dear Colleague letter from a year and a half ago comes in. The reason why the Obama administration was so insistent in its last year in office to redefine the word sex as gender identity was to force all public schools to go along with these claims. And that first step of the 4-part standard of care is social transition. So making public schools go along with these claims of gender identity. The third is the legal prohibition of, quote, misgendering someone. In New York City, you can be fined up to $250,000 for intentionally misgendering someone by using the wrong name or the wrong pronouns. And then the 4th aspect of policy that I want to mention today are the provision of medical services. Whether or not healthcare plans will have to cover sex reassignment procedures, whether or not physicians will have to perform them. And I'll come back to this last part at the end of the talk. Now, how do the activists defend these policies? This quote is in a handbook titled Schools in Transition, which was produced by the ACLU, along with the Human Rights Campaign, Gender Spectrum, the National Center for Lesbian Rights, and the National Education Association, the largest public sector union in the country, the largest public school teachers union in the country. So the largest teachers union has teamed up with the LGBT activist groups to produce a handbook on how schools should handle gender identity. And as you can see in the quote, the expression of transgender identity or any other form of gender expansive behavior is a healthy, appropriate, and typical aspect of human development. A gender expansive student should never be asked, encouraged, or required to affirm a gender identity or to express their gender in a manner that is not consistent with their self-identification and expression. Any such attempts or requests are unethical and will likely cause significant emotional harm. It is irrelevant whether a person's objection to a student's identity or expression is based on sincerely held religious belief or the belief that the student lacks capacity or ability to assert their gender identity, for example, due to age, developmental disability, or intellectual disability. So even if you think the 5-year-old is too young to be identifying as transgender, even if you think a 5-year-old with autism, and there's a clinically documented link between autism and gender dysphoria, even if you think that these children should be not encouraged to transition, but be treated with some other form of therapy, the guidelines say no. And then they explain the underlying motivation. Ultimately, the school environment must be set up so that transgender girls are treated like all other girls and transgender boys like all other boys. So a transgender girl, a boy who identifies as a girl, must be treated like every other girl. There's no room for reasonable accommodations. There's no room for saying we can understand why this student would feel uncomfortable in the boys' restroom, but can you also understand why the girls would be uncomfortable having this boy in their restroom? No, this boy who identifies as a girl has to be treated exactly like all other girls. The handbook is also rather disturbing in what it means for parental rights and for privacy, because the privacy protections are entirely in one direction. No concern for the privacy of the girls, who will now have to share a restroom or a locker room with boys who identify as girls, and no notification to parents. So the handbook actually has a section on how to deal with uncooperative parents. Privacy and confidentiality are critically important for transgender students who do not have supportive families. In those situations, even inadvertent disclosures could put the student in a potentially dangerous situation at home. So it is important to have a plan in place to help avoid any mistakes or slip-ups. So there's actually a checklist on what a school can do to allow a student to transition at school without the parents finding out. To allow a boy to be dropped off at school, to go to the principal's office where he will put on a dress and then be referred to using a female name and female pronouns for the rest of the day, go back to the principal's office at 4 o'clock, change out of his dress, back into his original clothes, and be picked up by his mother or father without the parents knowing what's going on at school. entirely subverts parental authority for the care and the upbringing of children. In the book, I go through the philosophical contradictions in the transgender worldview. I'll just mention a little bit here. If this was a university lecture, I would spend more time on this part, but I want to get to the public policy aspects since this is at a policy think tank. But the transgender worldview, it combines a new form of the ancient philosophy of Gnosticism, in which the real self is something other than a material body, while also at the same time embracing materialism, in which only material bodies exist. So simultaneously asserting two things that are mutually contradictory. Only material bodies exist, but the real self is something other than the material body. It insists, as that professor from UC San Francisco said, that, quote, gender exists primarily between our ears, in our brains and minds, and not necessarily by what's between our legs, while also promoting radical therapies to transform people's bodies. So if gender primarily exists between our ears, why do we then have to radically transform people's bodies? It relies on rigid sex stereotypes, in which girls play with dolls and boys play with trucks. And yet it insists that gender is purely a social construct, and thus there are no meaningful differences between men and women, all the while insisting that gender identity is real and meaningful, but the facts of human embodiment are not. And lastly, it embraces a radical expressive individualism, where people should be free to do whatever they want and to define the truth however they wish it to be. But it also enforces a ruthless paternalism, in which anyone who dares to dissent from transgender ideology will be coerced or punished. So what are some of the outcomes of transgender medicine and policy? So let me start. Contrary to the claims of the activists, sex isn't assigned at birth, and that's why it can't be reassigned. Sex is a bodily reality that can be recognized well before birth, with ultrasound imaging, for example. The sex of an organism is both defined and identified by its organization for sexual reproduction. Organisms are a collection of organs that are organized in various ways. And the sex of an organism is determined by that organism's organization with respect to sexual reproduction. Apart from that, all you have are sex stereotypes. There's no other objective standard for identifying the sex of an individual. Modern science shows that this organization begins with our DNA and with our development in the womb, and that sex differences manifest themselves in many of our bodily systems and organs, all the way down to the molecular level. The idea here is that our primary way in which our bodies are sexed, in the way that we're a sexually dimorphic species, is with respect to the complementary sexual reproductive systems, the male and the female. But then those systems, our different sexual organs and sexual hormones, influence the development of many of our other bodily systems, many of our other organs. So much so that the FDA now requires pharmaceutical companies to run tests on both men and women. Because disease impacts men and women differently, disease impacts male and female bodies differently, and pharmacological agents impact male and female bodies differently. Not because of gender identity, so it's not contrary to medical science to rely on these physical bodily differences. In fact, it's essential to medical science to actually diagnose diseases appropriately and then to prescribe the right treatments. And so the FDA now requires that these pharmacological agents be tested on both men and women. Women, just you know the history here, women were being prescribed bad dosages of medicines when they were only being tested on men's bodies. And so the dosage that might be appropriate for me might not be appropriate for you if I'm a man and you're a woman. Now, the secondary differences between the sexes, attributes that may be visibly changed by hormones and by surgery, those aren't what make us male and female. So as a result, cosmetic surgery and cross-sex hormones, they don't change the deeper biological reality. People who undergo sex reassignment procedures, they do not become the opposite sex. They merely masculinize or feminize their outward appearance. And so Professor Lawrence Mayer in response to that claim from the federal court in North Carolina, scientifically speaking, transgender men are not biological men, and transgender women are not biological women. The claims to the contrary are not supported by a scintilla of scientific evidence. And Professor Robert George at Princeton, changing sexes is a metaphysical impossibility because it is a biological impossibility. And sadly, just as sex reassignment fails to reassign sex biologically, it also fails to bring wholeness psychologically. Medical evidence suggests that it does not adequately address the mental health problems suffered by those who identify as transgender. Even the procedures, when they're successful as a technical and cosmetic matter, and even in cultures that are relatively trans-friendly, people still face poor psychological and social outcomes. And so to pivot to that discussion, a quote from Dr. Paul McHugh. Transgender, and this is within the context of an essay that he wrote after Bruce Jenner came out as Caitlyn Jenner. Transgender men do not become women, nor do transgendered women become men. All become feminized men or masculinized women, counterfeits or impersonators of the sex with which they identify. And in that lies their problematic future. When the tumult and shouting dies, it proves not easy nor wise to live in a counterfeit sexual garb. The most thorough follow-up of sex reassigned people, extending over 30 years and conducted in Sweden, where the culture is strongly supportive of the transgendered, documents their lifelong mental unrest. 10 to 15 years after surgical reassignment, the suicide rate of those who had undergone sex reassignment surgery rose to 20 times that of comparable peers. Dr. McHugh wrote this just a couple years ago after the Jenner interview, but these are the realities that he knew back in the 70s when he shut down the sex reassignment clinic at Hopkins. And that clinic remained shut down up until last year when Johns Hopkins announced it was reopening it after significant pressure from LGBT activists at the writing that Dr. McHugh has done on these issues. It's not just Dr. McHugh. I want to share a couple of results from literature reviews by professional organizations that have been trying to determine whether or not these sex reassignment procedures actually help their patients. So the first is The Guardian, the UK newspaper, The Guardian, their weekend edition. They asked Birmingham University's Aggressive Research Intelligence Facility, ARIF, to assess this. And so this was reported in The Guardian back in 2004. And I give full citations to everything that I'm quoting in this lecture in the book. Guardian Weekend asked Birmingham University's Aggressive Research Intelligence Facility to assess the findings of more than 100 follow-up studies of post-operative transsexuals. ARIF, which conducts reviews of healthcare treatments for the NHS, National Health Service, concludes that none of the studies provides conclusive evidence that gender reassignment is beneficial for patients. It found that most research was poorly designed, which skewed the results in favor of physically changing sex. There was no evaluation of whether other treatments, such as long-term counseling, might help transsexuals, or whether their gender confusion might lessen over time. So the studies that you see the activists in the mainstream media point to say that these transitioning therapies are beneficial, this is what an objective research organization a decade ago, when they evaluated those studies, point to. And so you might say, oh, well, your science is outdated. That's from 2004. So let me give you a more recent study from 2014, just 3 years ago, 4 years ago now. Statistically significant improvements have not been consistently demonstrated by multiple studies for most outcomes. Evidence regarding quality of life and function in male to female adults was very sparse. Evidence for less comprehensive measures of well-being in adult recipients of cross-sex hormone therapy was directly applicable to GD, gender dysphoria patients, but was sparse and or conflicting. The study designs do not permit conclusions of causality, and studies generally had weaknesses associated with study execution. There were potentially long-term safety risks associated with hormone therapy, but none have been proven or conclusively ruled out. In other words, this is all entirely experimental. There are no conclusive studies on this. Right, you might say that that's the Hayes Incorporated. They're a research and consulting firm that evaluates the safety and health outcomes of medical technologies. So this is what hospitals and health insurance companies use to determine what they should be doing in their clinics, what they should be covering in their healthcare plans. So they ask a group like HARASS to evaluate all sorts of medical technologies. Let me give you something even more recent. 2016, the Obama administration, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This is in their proposed decision memo, which was in June of 2016, a year and a half ago. Based on a thorough review of the clinical evidence available at this time, there is not enough evidence to determine whether gender reassignment surgery improves health outcomes for Medicaid beneficiaries with gender dysphoria. There were conflicting, inconsistent study results. Of the best designed studies, some reported benefits while others reported harms. The quality and strength of evidence were low due to the mostly observational study designs with no comparison groups, potential confounding, and small sample sizes. Many studies that reported positive outcomes were exploratory type studies, case series and case control, with no confirmatory follow-up. This is the Obama administration's Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services a year and a half ago, evaluating all of the existing studies on this. The final report, which came out 2 months later in August, overall, the quality and strength of evidence were low due to mostly observational study designs with no comparison groups, subjective endpoints, potential confounding, small sample sizes, lack of validated assessments tool, and considerable loss to follow-up. That loss to follow-up are people who they can no longer identify. Many fear that those are some of the people who have committed suicide. And then lastly, of the 33 studies reviewed, published results were conflicting. It goes on, let me get to the point. Several reported positive results, but the potential issues noted above reduced strength and confidence. After careful assessment, we identified 6 studies that could provide useful information. Of these, the 4 best designed and conducted studies that assessed quality of life before and after surgery using validated psychometric studies did not demonstrate clinically significant changes or differences in psychometric test results after gender reassignment surgeries. So of the studies that the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare could identify, the best of those studies show no improvement after sex reassignment surgery for the patients who are seeking them. And as McHugh pointed out from the Swedish study that looked at people over a 30-year time span and looked at them 10, 15, 20 years out from the surgery, significant persistence in mental health problems and psychosocial problems, and unfortunately in both suicide attempts and suicide completions. People who are suffering are not receiving the medical care that they deserve. And for children, it's particularly disturbing because that 4-part standard of care that I mentioned is entirely experimental. Puberty blocking drugs are not FDA approved for treating gender dysphoria. They were tested and FDA approved for treating a condition known as precocious puberty, when a child begins going through puberty too early in life. And these drugs are designed to delay puberty by a year or so that the child can go through puberty at an age-appropriate time. They're now being used off-label to indefinitely block puberty for these children. There are no laws in the United States that govern the use of these drugs. There's nothing that regulates at what age they can be administered. And there's not a single large, randomized, long-term controlled study that documents the outcomes of puberty suppression and cross-sex hormones, nor any study that compares puberty suppression and cross-sex hormones to other psychotherapeutic interventions. We are conducting a giant experiment on children who are suffering from gender dysphoria. The activists claim that this treatment protocol is reversible, and so that you can block puberty, and then if the child decides to go back to their original sex, you can recommence puberty, and therefore it's, quote, reversible. But the idea that going through a developmental process at age 16, 17, or 18, that you were supposed to go through at age 9, 10, or 11 is reversing it, turns biological science upside down. This will impact every biological bodily system that is impacted by puberty. Your growth spurt, your bone density, your height, your weight, your musculature, by indefinitely delaying this process by years. And we aren't even confident that it is fully reversible because it's also somewhat self-fulfilling. The Dutch clinic that pioneered this approach, all of the children who were put on puberty blocking drugs in their study of this persisted in their transgender identity. What we know from the literature is that 80 to 95% of children with gender dysphoria normally grow out of it and reconcile their identity with their body. And yet 100% of the ones who were placed on puberty-blocking drugs persisted in their transgender identification. And this has led several researchers to worry that this is actually a self-fulfilling treatment protocol, that it's locking in the transgender identity. That it may very well be for that boy who is identifying as a girl, going through puberty in his male body, having that rush of testosterone as he matures that precisely helps him re-identify with his body. And that by blocking that developmental process, you can actually be preventing him from identifying with his body. The part of the book that was most difficult to research and write was a chapter on people who have detransitioned. And everything that I've said now, I think can prepare you for better understanding why someone who was experiencing gender dysphoria might have initially made the decision to transition and then later might have come to regret it. Right? Because what these people, what their stories do is they complicate the kind of sunny picture that the media presents for sex reassignment. Bruce Jenner will have a 2-hour special on Friday night on 2020, and others will not. Walt Heyer, a man who transitioned in middle ages, lived as a woman, and then detransitioned. Walt will not be featured on 2020 to tell his story. Many of these people, they feel that they were pressured into transitioning, that the gender therapists that they saw at the gender clinic didn't present any alternative treatment options, didn't explore any of the other possible causes for their gender dysphoria. Many of them now regret the permanent damage that they've done to their bodies. Those who transitioned as teenagers feel that they were much too young to be making such life-altering decisions. And many of them feel that their gender dysphoria was the result of social hostility to people like them from people like me. And so it's important that social conservatives do some soul searching to make sure that we're not contributing to the culture in which gender dysphoria can occur and occur with greater prevalence, that we're not stigmatizing tomboys or, quote, sissies, that we're not overly rigid in our understanding of sexuality and of gender and of sex roles or gender roles. Because many of these people report that it's social conservatives, it's the religious right who created the atmosphere in which their gender dysphoria unfortunately took in, and then people like me stigmatize and attack them. So it's important that we not contribute to that. But by the same token, we have to insist that transgender activists stop attacking those who have detransitioned, claiming that they were never transgender to begin with. And as Emily mentioned in the introduction, trying to silence those voices who complicate the narrative that they want to present. The Telegraph, another UK paper, October 1st, 2017, just 4 or 5 months ago, it ran a report with this headline: "Sex change regret. Gender reversal surgery is on the rise, so why aren't we talking about it?" And the answer to that question is political correctness. But when it comes to human lives, it's better to be correct than politically correct. Let me close with a couple of words of what a better therapeutic approach looks like. Actually, I need to say this and then the policy stuff. So two closing comments. What a good therapeutic response looks like, and then what should public policy, what should our laws say on these things? A more cautious therapeutic approach begins by acknowledging that the vast majority of children will grow out of a stage of gender dysphoria naturally, if their development is not blocked and if they're given the time and the space to do so. An effective therapy looks into the reasons for a child's mistaken beliefs and feelings about their gender identity, and it addresses the problems that the child thinks will be solved by transitioning. Many health professionals liken gender dysphoria to other types of dysphoria, serious discomforts with the body. So gender dysphoria, they will describe it as similar to something like anorexia or body dysmorphic disorder or body integrity identity disorder. All of these involve false assumptions and feelings about one's body, which can then solidify into mistaken beliefs about the self. And so Dr. McHugh finds that many other psychosocial issues usually lie underneath a child's mistaken assumptions. He writes in one paper that children with gender dysphoria have many anxieties about, quote, the prospects, expectations, and roles that they sense are attached to their given sex. So you have a boy or a girl who has anxiety about what he or she thinks society expects in terms of the prospects, the expectations, and the roles that boys and girls are supposed to fulfill, that men and women are supposed to fulfill. And so by assigning their sex, identifying as the opposite sex, they hope to escape some of those anxieties. But so as a result, the most helpful therapies, they don't try to remake the body to conform to mistaken thoughts and feelings. That's impossible. But rather, they try to help people find healthy ways to manage that tension and that distress that they feel, and then move towards accepting the reality of their bodily selves. This therapeutic approach, as I discuss in the book, it rests on a sound understanding of what physical and mental health is, and what the purpose of medicine in restoring physical and medical health and mental health. So let me give you two case studies that I discuss in chapter 6 of the book. One involved a young boy who was identifying as a girl, presenting as a girl. And in the course of talk therapy, as the physician was trying to determine, why do you think you're a girl trapped in a boy's body? You know, what is it about being a girl that you think will make your life better? The therapist was able to determine that the boy was being bullied by the other boys in his school. He wasn't the stereotypical macho guy who enjoyed roughhousing and doing kind of stereotypical boy things. And so as a result, he was being picked on. He was being called a sissy. He started developing closer friendships with the girls in his class. His interests, his activities more aligned with stereotypically feminine interests and activities. And as a way of coping with his bullying and with his new peer group, he was identifying as a girl. And so the therapist suggested 3 things to address this. 1, remove the child from the toxic environment where he's being bullied. Take the child out of this situation that's causing the gender dysphoria. 2, talk to the child to let him know that boys can be compassionate. Boys can be kind. Not all boys have to be bullies. And just So what we know from the literature is that 80 to 95 can occur with greater prevalence, that we're not stigmatized. Gender dysphoria have many anxieties about, quote, the prospects, expectations, and roles that they sense are attached to their given sex. So you have a boy or a girl who has anxiety about what he or she thinks society expects in terms of the prospects they expect, and then move towards accepting the reality of their bodily selves. This therapeutic approach, as I discussed in the book, it rests on a sound understanding of what physical and mental health is and what the purpose of medicine in restoring physical and medical health and mental health. So let me give you two case studies that I.
Okay, so I just want to say to you all, I didn't do anything. It just stopped playing. I don't know what happened. Kind of freaked. And for some reason, I just felt the need to start putting in the time moments. The last one I put in was 53:30. So we're coming upon it soon. So let's see if something actually happened with their video and it's not
in
just
chapter 6
me.
of the book. One involved a young boy who was identifying as a girl, presenting as a girl. And in the course of talk therapy, as the physician was trying to determine, why do you think you're a girl trapped in a boy's body? You know, what is it about being a girl that you think will make your life better? The therapist was able to determine that the boy was being bullied by the other boys in his school. He wasn't the stereotypical macho guy who enjoyed roughhousing and doing kind of stereotypical boy things. And so as a result, he was being picked on. He was being called a sissy. He started developing closer friendships with the girls in his class. His interests, his activities more aligned with stereotypically feminine interests and activities. And as a way of coping with his bullying and with his new peer group, he was identifying as a girl. And so the therapist suggested three things to address this. One, remove the child from the toxic environment where he's being bullied. Take the child out of this situation that's causing the gender dysphoria. Two, talk to the child to let him know that boys can be compassionate. Boys can be kind. Not all boys have to be bullies. And just
Okay, it wasn't me. It wasn't me that cut this out. Someone else did. Look how much longer this goes. Yeah, they cut it out at that point.
in the locker room.
They cut it out until when? Till when?
Javits Center in New York City.
It seems like he's finished a speech and he's going through questions and answers.
In the front, then we'll have to wrap up.
Here we go.
His name's Dave Onsbach. A few weeks ago, I was at a event at the Javits Center in New York City. I saw, using the washrooms there, longer lines for women to use the washroom than the men's. So you ended up, some women had to go, so they ended up using the men's to along with the other men's.
Right.
My question is, do you support punishing those women for what they did? Why or why not?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm not interested in policing bathrooms at all. Like, I'm not interested in kind of punishing people for using the wrong restroom. What I'm interested in is what type of policies should be established in the first place. Normally, men don't feel particularly distressed when they see women in a state of undress, or when women see them in a state of undress. If you look at the Me Too movement right now, it's remarkable how unidirectional it is. It's men indecently exposing themselves to women. It's men sexually harassing or raping their female colleagues. So the general concern, this is actually a sex difference, is that women are much more sensitive.
There have been plenty of times where I've been out at a bar and the women's line is really long to get into the bathroom. And by the time I decide I need to go to the bathroom, I don't want to wait that long. And I have never, ever, ever, ever had men have a problem with me going into the men's restroom. Ever. And it's not like I was peeing in a urinal. I would use the stall. No man ever had a problem with that. So was I in there to rape the little boys? No, I was in there to pee. By the way, this was at bars, so if there were any little boys there, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. But at Target, stores like that, they actually have more stalls for women than they do men. So, because they know women are shopping there more than men. Even though they know lots of women come to the bars, they still keep it to where here's the patriarchy in force for you. How's this one? The men can get in and out of the bathrooms no problem because there's urinals and 1 or 2 stalls. Women require stalls, so that means that takes up more space. So now we're left standing in a line to go to the bathroom. There's the patriarchy for you. But hey, I don't pay attention to the patriarchy because I will, if I really need to go and I know I ain't gonna make it through this line, I'll ask a guy, can I cut in front of you? Because I gotta go and I ain't waiting through that line. And most of the men, they have no problem with it. They think it's funny and they actually admire me more because I have the gumption, the ovaries to say, I gotta go now. I ain't waiting in that line. They like it. No problem. And hey, you see one penis, you've seen most of them, right? They're pretty much shaped the same thing. Pretty much. All right. Well, I guess I just spoke too much. All right, here we go. Let's go. Let this finish off. The one time I cut off is about me. There went the thunder again. There went me talking about going to the bathroom.
Sensitive to being seen when they are undressed by men and in seeing men when they are undressed than men are. But regardless of kind of what the relative distributional patterns are, the policy we should set is that people deserve a certain amount of privacy and safety when engaged in intimate bodily functions at the bathroom, in the locker room, in shower facilities. And that's why we have created separate facilities for men and women.
Fun fact, I was the first girl wrestler in my state. And basically, they didn't want to let me be a wrestler, not because I wasn't able, but because they would have to open up the girls' facility for the shower, dressing room, locker room in the schools, which would cost them more money. So when they said, no, we don't have girls, I said, well, that's sexist and that's against the law. They didn't like that. And I had no lawyer. I just knew what to say, apparently. And they said, all right, fine. You be a side manager for the wrestling team. And then you get through that, which means I had to go through all their practices, had to do everything that they were doing. If they had to run a mile, I had to do it. And also had to take care of their bloody noses and their injuries and everything else that, the managers do. And normally where I'm from, they gave manager jobs to those who knew about wrestling but didn't make the team. So a lot of guys were already pissed off that I just automatically got this. And so I did everything that I was supposed to do that year. The next year I tried out and they were like, yeah, but, and I said, there's no but. This was the agreement. This was the deal. This was the contract. And I did everything you wanted me to do last year. I want on the team this year. So the schools did have to, when we would do it at our school or at another school, they'd have to open up the girls' facility for me. So That's why they didn't want to do it, because it would cost them more money in electricity. What was great was the coach would actually stand outside my girls' locker room shower door, the room, not the door of the shower itself. Oh God, if I said it that way again, it'd come out the wrong way. Don't take it that way. He'd stand out there and make sure no guy ever came in. So that was fun. Got the whole place to myself. Didn't have to get snapped in the butt with a towel or anything. But I did bring out my own wet towel and snapped everybody else in the house. So guess I was being sexist.
In the first place. And in general, we should abide by those policies. But if you were at some event where there was a long line at the ladies' room and there wasn't a line at the men's room and some women went there, I don't think we have to be Kantian in how we enforce these laws and policy.
Oh, isn't that funny? He just brought that up. Huh. Let me go. I gotta go. I can't hold it any longer. That line's super long. Yours ain't. And you're gonna use a urinal. I'm gonna use a stall. Right? Right. Let me in.
Of saying every instance, every violation needs to be prosecuted. There is room for prosecutorial discretion. So with that, thank you all for coming. I apologize for going long.
Sadly, he didn't go long. The video cut out, and I want to know why the video cut out from that point unto that question. I want to know what else was said. I do. So here I am on that website. Let's scroll down. I gotta make a question. Oh, some more. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. Do I have to make this page bigger? Did they shut off the comments? You didn't. Where's the comments? Okay, well, sometimes my computer screws up and it doesn't show. Ooh, big thunder again. Sorry. Sometimes it doesn't show that there's comments. Wow. If they if they shut off their comments, I'm going to be very upset. So what I'm going to do is copy, close. Oh, hold on. And paste. Because I told you when it stopped, I started a new one. Because I thought my computer screwed up. There is no comment section. Heritage Foundation, open up your comment section. Damn it. All right, well, there we go. I want to know why there was no comment section. I want to know what I missed. Okay, so hopefully, let's go back to my Google. Stop screen sharing. You don't need to see all that stuff. All right, well, thank you to everyone who showed up. And I'll see you later. Promise. And I know I haven't been living up to my promises of getting my videos out and everything, but I lost my best friend. I lost my dog, and I'm close to just losing it. I drove to the store to go get milk and eggs, and there was a guy outside with his dog, and I just started crying as I was driving by. I'm not in a good place, but I'm doing my best to fulfill my promises. So just give me a little bit of forgiveness at this point of not doing what I promised. I'm getting back though. I felt it more today. I'm getting back more. So I'm sure at any moment in time I'm going to just start busting out crying again. So if that happens, you're just going to have to deal with it. That's all I can say right now, because, you know, he was my best friend. He was very important to me, and I'm fine right now talking about it. But the minute I get up and see his dog bed right behind me, because I haven't gotten rid of that, or go to the kitchen and see his food bowl and water bowl, no guarantee I'm going to do fine. So that's where I'm at right now. Just letting you know. And again, 7-Eleven, looking at the clock. Always, it's 11 minutes after whatever. Every time I look at the clock, it's 11 minutes after whatever hour. Anyway, thank you to you guys showing up, and thank you to you folks who watch us later. And I really hope you have a great night. I need to go around and close the windows. It got to be 81 degrees here today. So yeah, I opened up the house, but it's starting to get chilly. Gonna lose 40 degrees tonight, so I need to close these windows before I forget to close them. So that's what I'm gonna do now, close the windows, and I'll be back. There's another video that I want to cover, so talk to you later. Love ya, and you guys have a great evening.